What if the spotlight couldn't protect the brightest stars from one of history's most feared epidemics? The rise of HIV and AIDS claimed legends in film, music, sports, and art, often cutting them down in their prime. How many of their stories have you actually heard? Stay with me, because some of the names on this list will shock you, and a few will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. Rock Hudson, the golden boy of Hollywood. Rock Hudson wasn't just a movie star, he was the movie star of the 1950s and 60s. Tall, broad-shouldered, and effortlessly charming, he ruled the silver screen in classics like Pillow Talk and Giant. But in 1985, the world learned the unthinkable. Hudson had AIDS. His diagnosis wasn't just personal, it became public in a way that forced the conversation about the disease into living rooms worldwide. Until Hudson, HIV and AIDS were rarely discussed openly. His decision to acknowledge his illness shattered the silence. For millions, it was the first time they realized the epidemic wasn't confined to rumors or back-page stories. It was real, and it could touch anyone. The press was relentless, but Hudson stood firm. Even in his final days, he carried himself with dignity. When he passed in October 1985, Hollywood lost one of its brightest icons. More importantly, the world lost the innocence of ignoring the epidemic. Hudson's legacy became bigger than the movies he made. He became the unwilling face of a crisis. Sometimes history doesn't ask, it demands. Freddie Mercury. Charisma personified. Freddie Mercury wasn't just a singer, he was an earthquake on stage. As the frontman of Queen, he gave us songs that will live forever. Bohemian Rhapsody, We Will Rock You, Don't Stop Me Now. But behind the sequined jackets and electric performances, Mercury was fighting a private battle. In the late 1980s, whispers began. Fans noticed he looked thinner, more fragile. Mercury kept his struggle private for years, but on November 23, 1991, he released a public statement confirming he had AIDS. The next day, he was gone. The speed of his passing sent shockwaves around the world. One moment he was the flamboyant rock god, the next, he was a tragic reminder of how ruthless the disease could be. Fans flocked to memorials, and fellow musicians organized massive tribute concerts. His death helped change public awareness, proving that HIV didn't discriminate. It could take the biggest voice in rock and silence it overnight. Mercury's story isn't just about loss, it's about impact. Even in death, his music roars louder than the silence his illness tried to impose. If there was ever proof that legends never truly leave Freddie Mercury, is it Anthony Perkins. Think about the movie Psycho, that shower scene, that chilling smile. Anthony Perkins carved his name into cinema history as Norman Bates, one of the most terrifying characters of the 20th century. But behind the curtain of fame, Perkins faced a battle the public never saw coming. By the early 1990s, Perkins was struggling with HIV-related illness. Unlike others, he chose to keep his condition hidden until the very end. He believed the stigma around the disease was as deadly as the illness itself. Perkins feared being defined by his diagnosis rather than his work. When he passed away in September 1992, the truth finally surfaced. Fans who only knew him as Hollywood's master of suspense were stunned. For a man who once played a character locked away in secrecy, his own final chapter carried the same haunting echoes. Perkins' story speaks volumes about the fear that surrounded the epidemic at the time. Even icons felt trapped by silence. Yet his work remains immortal. Psycho still thrills new generations, while his death stands as a reminder that even the brightest talents couldn't outrun the crisis. Sometimes the scariest part of a horror story isn't the script, it's reality. Arthur Ashe. Arthur Ashe changed tennis forever. He wasn't just a champion, he was a trailblazer. The first black man to win Wimbledon in 1975, Ashe redefined what was possible on and off the court, but fate dealt him a devastating card. Ashe contracted HIV from a blood transfusion during heart surgery in the 1980s. Unlike many stars who hid their illness, Ash eventually chose to go public in 1992. He knew the stigma could be crushing, but he wanted his voice to carry a bigger purpose. When he spoke about his diagnosis, he did it with grace and courage. Ash used his platform to spread awareness, educate the public, and push back against ignorance. For him, the disease wasn't just personal, it was a chance to fight a larger battle. In February 1993, Ash passed away at only 49. His death wasn't just a loss for tennis, it was a global tragedy. To this day, the Arthur Ashe Courage Award presented at the ESPYs honors athletes who show his same strength and resilience. Ashe proved that even when life delivered a crushing blow, dignity and bravery could still define a legacy. He was a champion to the end. Eazy-E West Coast rap had many voices, but none hit harder than Eazy-E. As a founding member of NWA, he brought raw truth to the world with tracks that shook the music industry. His style was loud, unapologetic, and unfiltered. He wasn't afraid to say what others wouldn't. But his life took a shocking turn. In early 1995, Eazy-E announced he had AIDS. The statement stunned fans and rivals alike. This was the man known as the godfather of gangsta rap, suddenly facing the most ruthless opponent imaginable. Within weeks, his health spiraled. By March of that year, he was gone, just 31 years old. Eazy-E's death wasn't just personal, it was cultural. The rap world was forced to confront HIV and AIDS in a way it never had before. His passing highlighted that the disease could strike anywhere, no matter your image or lifestyle. For a man who built his career on hard truths, his final truth hit harder than any lyric. To this day, fans remember him not just for his music, but for how quickly the world lost him. In the blink of an eye, hip-hop lost a pioneer, and silence fell where there had once been fire. Gia Karangi. Before the term supermodel was even mainstream, Gia Karangi embodied it. In the late 1970s and early 80s, she dominated magazine covers and runway shows with a wild, magnetic beauty that designers couldn't resist. Gia wasn't just modeling clothes, she was rewriting what it meant to be an icon. But fame came with shadows. Her personal life spiraled quickly, and soon she found herself caught in a downward slide that her career couldn't protect her from. By the mid-80s, her health began to fail. When she was diagnosed with AIDS, few in the fashion world wanted to acknowledge it. The industry that had once lifted her to superstardom turned its head in silence. Gia passed away in November 1986, at just 26 years old. Her story became one of the first highly publicized cases of a model dying from AIDS. Later, her life inspired documentaries and even a film starring Angelina Jolie, which revealed the turbulence behind the beauty. Gia's tragedy wasn't just her illness, it was how quickly an industry that praised her abandoned her. In many ways, she became a haunting symbol of how cruel fame can be. Her story forces us to ask, what's the cost of being adored one day and forgotten the next? Robert Mapplethorpe. Robert Mapplethorpe wasn't interested in playing safe. His photography was bold, confrontational, and unforgettable. In the 1970s and 80s, he challenged the art world by pushing boundaries, capturing images that were as provocative as they were beautiful. But behind the lens, his life was racing against time. In 1986, Mapplethorpe was diagnosed with AIDS. Unlike many who stayed quiet, he chose to confront the illness openly. He poured his energy into creating more work, determined to leave behind a legacy before the disease claimed him. His photographs became sharper, his perspective more urgent. It was as if every click of the camera was a race against the inevitable. By the time he passed in 1989 at just 42, he had created a body of work that ensured he would never be forgotten. His art sparked debates in galleries, politics, and the courts. Critics argued, audiences gasped, but no one could deny his genius. Mapplethorpe's death wasn't just a loss for the art world, it was a lightning strike. His legacy forced people to look directly at topics they had avoided. He turned his final years into a declaration that creativity could outlive even the harshest realities. Some artists fade with time. Mapplethorpe only became sharper. Michel Foucault. The world of ideas has its rock stars too, and Michel Foucault was one of them. A French philosopher, historian, and social critic, his writings on power institutions and society changed the way millions of people thought about the world. He wasn't a pop culture figure in the usual sense, but his influence stretched from universities to politics, and even pop music. By the early 1980s, however, Foucault was facing a private struggle. In 1984, he became one of the first major public intellectuals to die from complications of AIDS. His passing at just 58 was a cultural shock. The disease had largely been ignored or stigmatized in academic and political circles, and suddenly, one of the brightest minds of the century was gone. What made his story resonate was the timing. Foucault had been working on projects that tackled history, sexuality, and society in groundbreaking ways. His unfinished works left questions hanging in the air, like a book missing its final chapter. Even in death, his ideas lived on. His theories continue to influence disciplines as varied as sociology, literature, and political science. Foucault's passing was a harsh reminder that the epidemic didn't discriminate. It could silence not just singers and actors, but the thinkers shaping our world. His voice was lost, but his words still echo. Keith Haring. Walk through any city today, and you might still see them. Bright, cartoonish figures dancing, crawling, or glowing with energy. That's the legacy of Keith Haring, the street artist turned global phenomenon of the 1980s. His art wasn't confined to galleries, it was on subway walls, T-shirts, and murals that spoke directly to the public. Haring was more than an artist. He was a visual activist. He used his platform to speak about politics, inequality, and yes, HIV and AIDS. After being diagnosed himself in 1988, he channeled his energy into creating the Keith Haring Foundation to support awareness and research. His brush never slowed down, even as his health declined. In February 1990, Haring passed away at only 31, but his influence hasn't faded. From fashion collaborations to museum retrospectives, his work is everywhere. His playful yet urgent images remind us that art isn't just decoration. It can be a weapon, a voice, a lifeline. Haring's story is bittersweet. He knew his time was short, so he worked with furious intensity, determined to leave behind more than just memories. And he succeeded. To this day, his bright, bold figures shout louder than words ever could. His art made sure the fight against AIDS would never be invisible. Pedro Zamora. Reality TV wasn't always about drama and gossip. In the early 90s, it gave the world something it had never seen before. Pedro Zamora. A young Cuban-American activist, Zamora became a cast member of MTV's The Real World, San Francisco, in 1994. He wasn't just another housemate. He was living with HIV, and he was determined to educate millions. Zamora's openness about his illness was groundbreaking. He used his platform to talk about safe practices, stigma, and the reality of living with the disease. Viewers watched his struggles, his activism, and even his commitment ceremony to his partner, something almost unheard of on mainstream television at the time. But the story took a heartbreaking turn. As the season aired, Zamora's health declined rapidly. He passed away in November 1994, just hours after the final episode of his season was broadcast. Fans across the country were stunned. Pedro's bravery left a legacy far beyond reality TV. He helped humanize the epidemic for an entire generation that might otherwise have ignored it. MTV dedicated programming to his memory, and fellow castmates described him as a teacher, first celebrity second. Zamora proved that courage and honesty can change culture. His time was short, but his message is still teaching. Jermaine Stewart. If you grew up in the 1980s, you know his voice. Jermaine Stewart gave us the unforgettable anthem, "We Don't Have to Take Our Clothes Off," a feel-good pop hit that celebrated fun and innocence in an era known for excess. With his smooth moves and upbeat sound, Stewart seemed destined for a long career. But by the mid-90s, whispers about his health began to swirl. Jermaine had contracted HIV, and unlike some who chose to fight in silence, he continued performing while struggling with the illness. Sadly, his energy began to fade, and on March 17, 1997, Stewart passed away at just 39. His death hit especially hard because his music had been so full of life and joy. He represented optimism, light, and dance floors that never closed. Fans were stunned to see someone who sang about celebrating life cut down so young. What makes Stewart's story powerful is the irony. His biggest hit was about innocence and fun without consequence, yet his life ended because of a disease that carried so much stigma and fear. He left behind only a handful of albums, but the positivity of his music still resonates today. His passing was a stark reminder that HIV didn't care about chart positions or pop culture fame. It struck anyone, even the voices that made us smile. Tom Fogerty. Every band has that one member who seems to live in the shadow of the frontman. For Creedence Clearwater Revival, John Fogerty was the star, but his older brother Tom was a key part of their early sound. He may not have been the face of CCR, but he was part of the machine that pumped out classics like Bad Moon Rising and Fortunate Son. After leaving the band in the early 70s, Tom pursued a solo career that never quite matched CCR's massive success. But tragedy struck decades later. During a routine back surgery in the 1980s, Tom received a tainted blood transfusion. That transfusion gave him HIV. Unlike many stars whose illness stayed private, Tom's health struggles became known as his condition worsened. By September 1990, he passed away at just 48. His death shocked fans, especially because it stemmed from a medical procedure gone wrong. Even sadder was the strained relationship between Tom and his brother John, which never fully healed before Tom's death. For CCR fans, that lingering rift adds an extra layer of heartbreak. Tom Fogerty's story is a reminder that fame doesn't shield you from tragedy, and sometimes the cruelest twists of fate come not from choices, but from sheer bad luck. Liberace. Few entertainers lit up a stage like Liberace. With his rhinestone suits, grand pianos, and flamboyant showmanship, he was the king of glitz from the 1950s through the 80s. Audiences adored him, and his television specials and Las Vegas shows made him one of the highest-paid performers in the world. But when Liberace fell ill in the mid-80s, rumors spread quickly. At the time, the stigma surrounding HIV and AIDS was so intense that his team denied he was sick at all. They claimed he was suffering from everything except the truth. But when he passed away in February 1987, the coroner confirmed what the world had suspected: Liberace had died from AIDS-related complications. The revelation shocked fans. This was a man who had built an empire on glamour and excess, only for his final chapter to be shrouded in secrecy and denial. Some argued that Liberace's refusal to acknowledge his illness openly prevented wider awareness, while others said it was his way of preserving privacy in a ruthless media climate. Either way, his death was a turning point. The larger-than-life entertainer became one of the first high-profile celebrities linked to the epidemic. His story proved that even those who seemed untouchable on stage could be brought down by the silence of stigma. Liberace dazzled the world, but behind the sequins was a man facing the same fear as millions of others. Dak Rambo. Soap operas thrived on drama, but the story of Dak Rambo's life was more tragic than any plot twist on television. A handsome leading man, Rambo was a regular face on shows like Dallas and Another World. With his square jaw and smoldering stare, he was tailor-made for daytime and primetime audiences. But in the early 1990s, Rambo made headlines for something far more serious. He revealed publicly that he had contracted HIV. In a time when few celebrities were willing to speak openly, his honesty was both brave and groundbreaking. He wanted to use his fame to break the silence and help others understand the disease. Sadly, his openness didn't grant him more time. By March 1994, Rambo was gone at just 52 years old. Fans who had followed his soap opera romances were devastated, and colleagues remembered him as someone who faced his illness with courage. What makes his story so powerful is that he chose to be transparent when others felt forced into secrecy. He put a human face on a disease many only whispered about. In doing so, he gave strength to others who were fighting the same battle. Rambo's final act wasn't on screen. It was in the courage of telling the world the truth. Brad Davis. Brad Davis had one of the most haunting performances of the 1970s in the film Midnight Express. His portrayal of an American student imprisoned in Turkey was raw, gripping, and unforgettable. It made him a star, but fame didn't guarantee him an easy life. In the mid-'80s, Davis was diagnosed with HIV after receiving contaminated blood during a medical procedure. Instead of staying silent, he made a decision that few dared at the time. He went public. He spoke openly about his diagnosis, using his platform to criticize the health system and bring attention to the crisis. Davis's final years were difficult. He continued acting where he could, but his health declined. In September 1991, at only 41, his battle ended. His wife later revealed his struggles, highlighting his bravery in confronting a disease that many refuse to even name out loud. Brad Davis's story isn't just about illness, it's about defiance. He refused to let HIV define him in silence. Instead, he used his voice, however limited his time was, to demand accountability and awareness. His legacy isn't just a brilliant performance in a classic film, it's the courage of a man who stood up when so many were too afraid. Howard Ashman. Disney's renaissance in the late 1980s had one secret weapon: lyricist Howard Ashman. He co-wrote the unforgettable songs for The Little Mermaid in 1989 and Beauty and the Beast in 1991. His words gave life to characters that would define childhoods for decades. But behind the scenes, Ashman was fighting a battle that even fairy tales couldn't fix. Diagnosed with HIV during the production of The Little Mermaid, Ashman worked tirelessly despite his failing health. He poured his heart into every lyric, determined to finish the work he loved. Beauty and the Beast became a sensation, but Ashman never lived to see the film's full triumph. He passed in March 1991 at just 40 years old. At the Academy Awards the following year, Beauty and the Beast was dedicated to him. His partner and colleagues spoke of his genius, ensuring the world knew who had crafted those timeless songs. Ashman's death left a permanent hole in Disney's creative team, but his work proved that music can outlive even the harshest reality. His story is a reminder that sometimes the magic behind the curtain carries a heavy cost. Michael Jeter. If you saw The Green Mile or The Fisher King, you know Michael Jeter. With his wiry frame and expressive face, he was a character actor who could turn small roles into unforgettable ones. He even stole hearts on Sesame Street, bringing warmth and humor to children worldwide. But behind the sparkle of his performances was a long, quiet fight with illness. In the 1990s, Jeter revealed that he was living with HIV. Unlike many, he managed his condition successfully for years with treatment. His career blossomed despite his diagnosis. He won both an Emmy and a Tony Award, proving that talent could outshine stigma. But in March 2003, Jeter suddenly passed away at just 50. Though his death was not directly caused by AIDS, his years of battling the illness shaped his story. Fans mourned a man who had given them laughter, compassion, and depth in every role. Michael Jeter's legacy is one of resilience. He showed that HIV didn't have to mean the end of dreams. He kept acting, kept inspiring, and left behind a body of work filled with heart. His passing reminded audiences that bravery isn't always loud. It's sometimes found in the quiet persistence of simply carrying on. David Wojnarowicz. David Wojnarowicz was never quiet. As an artist and activist in the 1980s, he created work that confronted power inequality and the AIDS epidemic itself. His paintings, photography, and writing were blunt, often shocking, and impossible to ignore. For Wojnarowicz, art wasn't just expression, it was resistance. After his HIV diagnosis, his work became even more urgent. He channeled his anger and fear into pieces that demanded attention. He didn't want sympathy, he wanted action. His art took aim at government inaction and cultural silence, calling out the hypocrisy of ignoring a crisis while millions suffered. Wojnarowicz passed away in July 1992 at just 37 years old. His death was a gut punch to the art world and to activism. But even after his passing, his work continued to spark conversation. In fact, decades later, exhibitions of his art still ignite debates and inspire younger generations. He left behind a blueprint for how art can be weaponized in the fight against injustice. Wojnarowicz's story reminds us that while illness can silence a voice, it can't erase the echo. His message still roars. Art can outlive the artist, and sometimes it can shout louder than politics ever will. Sylvester. The disco era had no shortage of stars, but none were as unapologetically vibrant as Sylvester. Known as the Queen of Disco, Sylvester's powerhouse vocals lit up dance floors with hits like You Make Me Feel Mighty Real. He wasn't just a singer, he was a force of joy, individuality, and defiance in a world that often demanded conformity. By the late 1980s, Sylvester's health was failing. He had contracted HIV and became one of the few high-profile performers willing to speak openly about it. Even as his body weakened, his voice stayed strong. He continued performing, using his platform to raise awareness and funds for research. In December 1988, Sylvester passed away at just 41. The city of San Francisco, where he had become a local icon, flew flags at half-mast in his honor. Fans poured into the streets to mourn him, a testament to how deeply his music and courage had touched people. Sylvester's story isn't just about tragedy, it's about boldness. He lived authentically, refusing to dim his light, even when illness closed in. His music remains timeless, his influence stretching into house and pop music decades later. If disco was about freedom, Sylvester embodied it until the very end. Rudolf Nureyev. In the ballet world, Rudolf Nureyev was untouchable. Bursting onto the international stage in the 1960s, he electrified audiences with his athleticism, charisma, and daring performances. A defector from the Soviet Union, he became a global superstar, admired for his artistry as much as his rebellious spirit. But even legends fall. By the late 1980s, Nureyev was battling HIV. Unlike many stars, he didn't hide. He continued to perform, choreograph, and even conduct long after his diagnosis. Audiences marveled at his resilience, watching a man who refused to let illness dictate his life. Nureyev passed away in January 1993 at 54. His death marked the end of an era in ballet, but his influence lives on. Dancers still study his groundbreaking techniques, and his daring leaps and bold presence are the stuff of legend. His story is one of defiance. He didn't retreat or disappear. He danced until the curtain fell. Nureyev's passing was heartbreaking, but it also solidified his legend. He showed the world that while illness can weaken the body, it cannot erase genius. He will forever be remembered as ballet's wild, untamed star. Robert Reed. For millions, Robert Reed will always be remembered as Mike Brady, the calm, loving dad from the Brady Bunch. He embodied the image of the perfect father in American households throughout the 70s. But real life was far from the picture-perfect sitcom. In the early 90s, Reed fell gravely ill. He was diagnosed with HIV, something the public only learned after his death in May 1992. The revelation stunned fans. How could the wholesome Brady dad, who seemed immortal in reruns, have been taken by this disease? Reed's colleagues spoke of his professionalism, his dedication to acting, and the private struggles he never shared publicly. His death underscored how deeply the stigma around HIV forced even beloved stars into silence. Audiences who grew up with the Brady Bunch had to reconcile their childhood memories with a tragic new reality. Robert Reed's passing showed that HIV and AIDS didn't discriminate. It struck sitcom dads just as easily as rock stars and athletes. While the Brady Bunch theme song promised sunshine and laughter, Reed's final chapter reminded the world that behind television smiles, very real battles were being fought. Timothy Patrick Murphy, handsome, charming, and on the rise, Timothy Patrick Murphy had all the makings of a lasting Hollywood career. Best known for his role as Mickey Trotter on Dallas, Murphy brought charisma to the screen and quickly built a devoted fan base. But fame didn't shield him from tragedy. In the mid-'80s, Murphy was diagnosed with HIV. Unlike many stars who stayed silent, he remained open about his struggles. Still, the stigma was overwhelming, and opportunities began to dwindle. By December 1988, Murphy had passed away at just 29. His death at such a young age devastated fans who had seen in him the promise of a long and bright career. He became one of the first major soap opera actors to die from AIDS, and his passing hit the television world like a thunderbolt. Murphy's story is especially heartbreaking because it felt unfinished. He was just getting started, only beginning to show the full range of his talent. His life is a reminder that HIV didn't just cut down legends, it stole futures before they even had time to fully unfold. Steven Stucker. Comic genius often hides behind a quirky smile, and Steven Stucker had one of the quirkiest in Hollywood. He was the scene-stealing air traffic controller in the 1980 disaster comedy Airplane. His over-the-top delivery made him unforgettable, even in a cast full of big personalities. But in 1984, Stucker's life changed when he was diagnosed with AIDS. He became one of the first Hollywood actors to speak openly about the illness. At a time when fear and misinformation were rampant, Stucker used humor and honesty to raise awareness. He even appeared on talk shows challenging stigma with wit and charm. His health declined quickly, and by April 1986, he passed away at just 38. The comedy world lost a unique talent, one who had the courage to face tragedy with laughter. Stucker's legacy isn't just his memorable lines in Airplane, it's his bravery. By stepping forward publicly, he gave a human face to a disease most people wanted to ignore. He reminded the world that comedy can be a shield, a sword, and sometimes the bravest way to face the end. Paul Jabara. Paul Jabara lived for the spotlight. As a songwriter and performer, he delivered disco anthems that kept dance floors spinning. He penned the Oscar-winning Last Dance for Donna Summer in 1978 and co-wrote It's Raining Men, which became a camp classic. His work made him a legend in clubs worldwide. But the Disco King's story had a tragic turn. In the early 90s, Jabara was diagnosed with AIDS. His health declined rapidly, and in September 1992, he passed away at just 44. For fans of disco, it felt like losing one of the genre's heartbeat creators. Even after his death, Jabara's fingerprints remained on pop culture. His songs continued to fuel parties, drag shows, and celebrations everywhere. His music was about joy, release, and freedom, and that legacy never faded. Paul Jabara's passing was a harsh reminder that HIV claimed not only performers, but also the creative minds who gave others their spotlight. His work ensured that no matter how short his time was, the dance floor would always echo his spirit. Disco never died, it just carried Jabara's heartbeat forward. Merritt Butrick. Fans of Star Trek remember Merritt Butrick as David Marcus, the son of Captain Kirk in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan in 1982, and Star Trek III, The Search for Spock in 1984. With his youthful energy and strong screen presence, Butrick seemed poised for stardom. But behind the scenes, tragedy was brewing. In the mid-'80s, Butrick was diagnosed with HIV. He continued working, appearing in both television and film, but his career never had the chance to fully bloom. His illness advanced quickly, and in March 1989, he passed away at just 29 years old. His Star Trek colleagues later described him as deeply talented, someone who could have had a long and successful career. Fans mourned not just the character he portrayed, but the actor, whose life ended far too soon. Merritt Butrick's story highlights the cruelest part of the epidemic, the futures stolen before they had time to grow. His roles live on, especially in the enduring Star Trek franchise, but his absence is always felt. He remains a what-could-have-been star, whose career ended before it truly began. Michael Bennett. Broadway has had many choreographers, but few shaped it like Michael Bennett. He was the mastermind behind A Chorus Line, the groundbreaking 1975 musical that redefined theater. Bennett's genius was in capturing raw honesty, turning dancers' struggles into something universal, but success couldn't shield him from tragedy. By the mid-'80s, Bennett was diagnosed with AIDS. His health declined rapidly, yet he continued to pour himself into projects. He worked on Dreamgirls and other productions, refusing to let illness cut off his creativity. In July 1987, at just 44, Bennett passed away. His death shook Broadway to its core. Colleagues mourned not just a friend, but a visionary who had changed the stage forever. A chorus line was already a phenomenon. But Bennett's early passing gave it an even deeper resonance, a story about fleeting dreams mirrored by his own short life. Michael Bennett's story is tragic, but undeniable proof of how much brilliance can be packed into just a few decades. His choreography still influences Broadway today, and his death left a scar on the theater world that has never fully healed. Klaus Nomi. Klaus Nomi was unlike anything audiences had ever seen. A German countertenor who blended opera with new wave pop in the late 70s and early 80s, he appeared on stage in futuristic costumes that made him look like he'd stepped out of a sci-fi comic. His voice was otherworldly, soaring from haunting high notes to sharp, dramatic lows. But behind the flamboyant image, tragedy was approaching. Nomi was diagnosed with AIDS in the early 80s, becoming one of the first well-known performers to succumb to the illness. His frail health contrasted sharply with his theatrical persona. In August 1983, at only 39, he passed away. His death shocked fans in Europe and America, and many later pointed to him as one of the first major cultural figures lost to the epidemic. Nomi's legacy is unique. He didn't fit any mold musically or visually. His influence spread quietly, inspiring later artists in both pop and avant-garde music. He was proof that originality has no boundaries, and his early death highlighted just how much more he might have given. In his case, the world didn't just lose a voice, it lost an entire genre that only he could have created. Alan Wiggins. On the baseball field, Alan Wiggins was known for speed. Playing for the San Diego Padres and later the Baltimore Orioles, he was a second baseman who could turn a game around with his legs. In 1984, he helped lead the Padres to their first ever World Series appearance, making him a fan favorite. But in the late 80s, Wiggins' life began to unravel. After being diagnosed with HIV, his health collapsed quickly. He kept his illness private, but whispers began as his once brilliant career ended. By September 1991, he passed away at only 32. His death shocked Major League Baseball. Few players at the time had ever been linked publicly to the epidemic, and Wiggins became one of the first. Fans mourned a career that should have lasted much longer. Alan Wiggins' story is a reminder of how HIV touched every corner of society, even professional sports, where players seemed invincible. His legacy lives on in Padres history, but also in the sobering truth that no amount of talent or fame could shield anyone from the epidemic's reach. Rick Aviles. Most people remember Rick Aviles for one unforgettable role, the mugger in Ghost, who kills Patrick Swayze's character. But outside of that chilling performance, Aviles was a beloved comedian and actor known for his humor and charm. He performed stand-up, appeared in films, and seemed destined for a long career. But fate had other plans. Aviles was diagnosed with HIV, and as the illness advanced, his career slowed. He kept working as long as he could, appearing in the Cannonball Run and other projects, but his health deteriorated rapidly. In March 1995, Aviles passed away at just 42. His death came only 5 years after Ghost had made him widely recognized. Fans were shocked to realize that a man who had just entered mainstream fame was gone so soon. Aviles' story highlights the cruel timing of the epidemic. Just as he was breaking through, the disease struck him down. For every legend who fell at their peak, there were rising stars like Aviles, who never got to reach full potential. His name may not be as famous as others on this list, but his loss was no less profound. Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn was a name synonymous with power and controversy. He rose to prominence in the 1950s as chief counsel to Senator Joseph McCarthy during the infamous Red Scare hearings. Later, he became a high-profile New York lawyer representing celebrities and politicians and making as many enemies as he did allies. In the mid-'80s, Cohn was diagnosed with AIDS. True to his combative personality, he publicly denied it, claiming instead that he was suffering from cancer. His refusal to admit the truth reflected the stigma of the time, but also his lifelong obsession with controlling his image. He passed away in August 1986, at just 59. His death was headline news, a fittingly dramatic end to a career spent in the spotlight. Cohn's story is one of irony. A man who thrived on secrecy and manipulation was ultimately undone by a disease he refused to acknowledge. Whether admired or despised his death, made one thing clear. HIV was no respecter of power, wealth, or influence. Even the most ruthless players couldn't outmaneuver it. Denholm Elliott. British actor Denholm Elliott may not have been a household name, but his face was unforgettable. He appeared in dozens of films, including A Room with a View, and as Marcus Brody in Raiders of the Lost Ark in 1981, and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade in 1989. He specialized in playing witty, charming, slightly eccentric characters, stealing scenes without ever dominating them. In the late 80s, Elliott was diagnosed with HIV. He continued to act even as his health declined. By October 1992, he passed away at 70. His colleagues mourned him as one of Britain's finest character actors. Elliott's story highlights the quieter side of the epidemic. He wasn't a flashy star with headlines surrounding his private life. Instead, he was a steady, respected professional whose death reminded audiences that HIV touched everyone from rock stars to the dependable actors we loved in supporting roles. His legacy endures in the films that still captivate new generations. Every time fans watch Indiana Jones, they are seeing a man whose career was cut short by a disease that stole countless talents. Charles Ludlam. Charles Ludlam wasn't just an actor, he was a theater revolutionary. Founder of the ridiculous theatrical company in New York, Ludlam blended camp satire and drama into performances that pushed the boundaries of stage art. He became an underground icon in the 70s and 80s, known for his wit and daring. In 1987, Ludlam was diagnosed with AIDS. True to his theatrical spirit, he continued performing even as his health declined. His final role in The Artificial Jungle was staged while he was visibly ill, yet his energy never wavered. He passed away in May 1987 at just 44. The theater community mourned not only the loss of a brilliant performer, but also a fearless innovator. Ludlam's story reminds us that creativity often thrives on the margins. He wasn't a mainstream star, but his influence rippled far beyond his niche. His death silenced a unique voice in American theater, one that had dared to laugh, provoke, and challenge audiences in equal measure. Reggie Williams. In the world of football, Reggie Williams was a rising talent. A linebacker for the Cincinnati Bengals, he showed grit and potential throughout the late 70s and early 80s. But just as his career seemed poised for greatness, tragedy struck. Williams contracted HIV and kept his illness private for as long as possible. In the late 80s, his health began to deteriorate. By 1989, at only 36 years old, he passed away. Fans and teammates were stunned. His death marked one of the first high-profile cases of an NFL player succumbing to the epidemic. It sent shockwaves through professional sports, an arena where players were often seen as invincible. Reggie Williams' story is particularly heartbreaking because the world of football rarely acknowledges vulnerability. Yet here was proof that even the strongest on the field could fall victim. His name may not always appear in highlight reels, but his passing left a void that reminded the sports world of the epidemic's far-reaching impact. Ofra Haza. Known as the Madonna of the East, Israeli singer Ofra Haza captivated audiences worldwide with her ethereal voice. Blending traditional Yemeni music with modern pop, she achieved international fame in the 80s, with hits like Imnin Alu. Her music crossed borders, turning her into a global sensation. In the late 90s, Haza's health began to decline. In February 2000, she passed away at just 42, with her death linked to AIDS-related complications. Fans were stunned. To many, she seemed untouchable, a voice too heavenly to be silenced. Her passing sparked debates in Israel and beyond, as the stigma surrounding HIV was still powerful. But in the years since, her music has continued to thrive. Her influence can be heard in pop world music, and even electronic tracks that sample her vocals. Ofra Haza's story is a reminder of the epidemic's global reach. It wasn't confined to Hollywood or America, it claimed voices worldwide. Her loss was deeply felt, but her voice still echoes, soaring above borders and time. From movie stars to athletes, from artists to icons, this list shows the brutal reality of the HIV and AIDS epidemic. It stole lives in their prime, silenced voices that shaped culture and left behind stories that still echo today. Which of these stars shocked you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments, hit subscribe for more untold histories, and spread this video to keep their legacies alive. Because remembering them isn't just about the past, it's about refusing to let silence win again.